My name is Ryan Patton.
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
And this is Soundtrack Your Life. And today we are going to deviate from our normal format a little bit. And we're going to talk about the 2025 Alex Ross Perry film, Pavements. So instead of asking a guest why we're talking about Pavements, I guess I'll just say Pavement is my favorite band. And the fact that this movie exists is kind of ridiculous. And I jumped at the opportunity to get a screener of it so we could talk about it.
Yeah, we're very fortunate to get this screener of something that, not a lot of people have gotten to watch yet outside of festivals. And like Ryan said, he is our resident Pavement scholar. And I think it's fair to say that you take that task very seriously. How many times have you seen Pavement and or Stephen Malkmus live?
I think like 8 times, which is probably not a lot for... Well, I would say for when I grew up, it was very hard for me to watch Pavement because I think they played a lot of like 21 and up shows, and I was not 21 at the time when Pavement started.
Well, you're also not very old, so Pavement was not a band really during your formative concert-going years, but you did see them, twice back-to-back during the 2022 reunion shows?
Yeah, so I first saw them in 97 because they finally played an all-ages show. Had to leave the show early because I was a teen and I had school the next day. Saw them on the 2010 tour and then the 2022 tour. So I've kind of seen them in active band and then reunion band. I mean, it's the same people, but I've seen them as an active unit and kind of on this reunion tour kick. We saw them together in 2022.
Yes, we did.
And that is relevant because the film kind of takes place. There's a story of the band sort of angle, and then it kind of leads up to their first show on the 2022 reunion. That's kind of the timeline of the movie. Though the timeline is there's kind of alternate timelines as well.
And the narrative is loose, and the movie is experimental. So I think the first thing that we should say to people who have not seen it, and obviously these are spoilers for the movie Pavement, so don't come for us. That's what this show is about, is to talk about the film. It is very experimental, and there are multiple sort of fake stories going on within a real story, and it kind of exists in this nether space between irony and sincerity, which is not dissimilar to Pavement's music, I find. But tonally and in terms of what it tries to achieve or what the director tries to achieve, it's very ambitious. There's a lot going on. So the narrative of them preparing for their reunion shows it's very loose. It's kind of the only through line from start to finish, but a lot is happening in between.
Yeah. And it's very clear that Alex Ross Perry is a huge Pavement fan. You can tell that there's a lot of care taken. There's a lot of deep cuts throughout the movie, music-wise. But before we jump really deeply into the movie, I just wanted to bring up some Pavement connections we've had with guests in our past episodes. So Daniel Ephraim, who is the curator of the Steve Keen art book, he's also the Apples and Stereo manager. He's been on a couple of our episodes, Grosse Point Blank and the Elephant Six Recording Company documentary. He's actually thanked in the special thanks in the end credits. I tried to ask him what he did, and in a very Pavement-y answer, he said, "I just helped a little."
It's also a very Daniel answer, I feel. It's very humble.
Very humble, but also a little obtuse. And I don't know if that was intentional or not. But, we love to see Daniel's name in the credits. We know he's a huge Pavement fan. And obviously the Steve Keen art connection. I assume he probably helped out with the museum stuff. So awesome to see our friend of the podcast, Daniel, in the credits. In an early episode, I think it was our 10th or 11th episode, we did an episode on Xanadu with Tracy Lane. And so she runs a festival out in Missouri. I was connected with her through a friend, so it was my first time interviewing someone I didn't really know, which was a little bit nerve-wracking, but she was super cool. And my friend connected me with Tracy because, one, she would be a great guest, and also because My friend hates Pavement, but knows that I love Pavement, and Tracy has a really cool Pavement story. So her ex-husband was Pavement's tour manager in the mid to late '90s, and so after their wedding, he basically had to like immediately go on tour with the band. And so at their wedding, in front of the tour bus or tour van or whatever, they sang Tracy Lane a cappella to her, and then they jumped in the van and hit the road.
I mean, that should have made Pavements the film, because it's a great story.
Yeah, I was a little jealous, but also she said ex-husband, so I didn't want to like dwell on that too much.
I mean, it didn't help the marriage apparently, but
Yeah,
that's okay.
and then obviously with our music composer for our show, Phil, he wanted to talk about Brain Candy, which Matador Records did the soundtrack. Pavement has a song, Painted Soldiers, on that. So, it was just an excuse for us to talk about Pavement and Kids in the Hall. So those are kind of how we've talked about Pavement in the past. But today we're just going to directly talk about Pavement for the entire episode.
Even if Pavement doesn't want to directly talk about themselves, we are going to directly talk about Pavement.
Yes. So what I thought was really funny when I was going through the press materials that we got with the screener, they listed Alex Ross Perry as, I directed Her Smell, and I directed, the Harness Your Hopes video, blah, 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 blah. And then it said, and I also wrote the screenplay for Christopher Robin. And I thought that was a joke.
No, it's real.
But
yeah.
It's real. I thought it was like one of those meta jokes, like the movie. And I was like, wait, did he really write the Christopher Robin movie for Disney? And he is one of the screenwriters.
Hey, the artist got to make money too.
Hey, nope. I have no problem with it. It just seemed like it was just like him being a Malcolmist sort of joke,
You're right. And I think one thing about this film is that it does kind of make you question what's real versus what isn't. I think almost to a frustrating degree. If you knew nothing about Pavement going into this, you would assume that a lot of the things that they feature in this film are either real facts or real artifacts. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I even questioned some of the things in the artifacts in the museum. Like some of them were like obviously okay, like you don't really have a toenail from Gary Young.
You don't really have Gary Young's toenail. You don't really have, it's such a funny way to like refer to him. Like it's so oblique and so Pavement. You don't really have like, an Apple ad with Pavement in it. You don't really have an Abercrombie and Fitch app.
Right. Absolute vodka.
Absolute vodka. So there's definitely like, you have to question, are they being silly or are they being over what is this exactly, if you know and come in completely cold, which thankfully I don't. While I'm not a Pavement scholar, I certainly don't, know them to the degree that you do. I know enough to know that like that was all bullshit, but in kind of like a brilliant way. It was like brilliant bullshit.
Right.
I did really enjoy it.
Yeah, so the backstory on the movie is that Matador hired Alex Ross Perry to do some sort of, Pavement documentary with this 2022 tour coming up. And he went to Stephen Malcolmus, who said, I don't want a documentarian. I want a screenwriter who's not going to write a screenplay. So basically, Alex Ross Perry manifested what he thought Malcolmus wanted. Like, there was no follow-up question. And Malcolmus, I think, also said, like, he didn't want, like, one of those legacy things like they do for, like, classic rock bands.
Right.
So...
He knew what Bohemian Rhapsody, which...
Right.
Sure. It's not that kind of band.
Which makes sense. So Perry kind of went extra hard on the legacy and manifested this world where Pavement is the most important band because it's the most important band to him. And so he gave Pavement the important band treatment by creating a jukebox musical called Slanted, Enchanted. He created a Pavement museum, and he made a fake biopic called Range Life. And all of these things run kind of concurrently with, just the story of the band through like archival footage and talking heads.
Right. And I think it's important to say that these things exist as physical experiences in the world, at least other than Range Life, the sort of fake biopic / mockumentary moments that happen in the film. the thing that happened to the Whitney was real. All of the performances from, people like Snail Mail, that's all real. It was a real experience. What happened with Slanted and Enchanted was real. That was actually like performed for people. And these things became content for the eventual Pavements film. So it all had to be orchestrated, right, way in advance and in a way that you wouldn't normally make a film. And I think there are some pieces of the press material that are like, we didn't really set out to make a film. It's a film, but it isn't.
Right. And you have the band reacting to these newly created experiences. You have Joe Keery meeting Steve Malkmus, Joe Keery playing Stephen Malkmus, meeting Stephen Malkmus. You have behind the scenes of Joe Keery trying to become Stephen Malkmus. So there's a lot of like layers. It's like an Inception sort of documentary film about Pavement.
Absolutely. And I think you could compare aspects of it to other things, like even the Weird Al documentary movie, which is totally different tone. It's sort of the same gimmick of we're going to refuse to mythologize Weird Al, and instead we're going to, cast Daniel Radcliffe as Weird Al and make it all, really ridiculous with all of these fake stories and facts. And that's kind of our way of confronting whatever our legacy means. This does kind of some similar things, but it is so ambitious, and it does all of them at one time, right? Like this is all, again, happening concurrently. So when you're watching Pavements, you're moving in and out of the way they're curating this experience at the Whitney. You're moving in and out of the rehearsals for Slanted and Enchanted, which take on this very kind of Nathan Fielder tone. Like, you don't really know.
I feel like all these experiences have a very Nathan Fielder tone.
It's very Nathan Fielder. It's very like the rehearsal. It's very, you don't really know, actually, or I didn't for a while. And like, are people in on it that are performing this musical, or because they're very serious, right, about their job, and that, you see them talking about like how atonal some of the songs are and how they translate, the song to the stage and do these arrangements, and they're struggling with the arrangements and the dance, and you're just kind of like, wow, they're really taking this seriously. And meanwhile, like, members of the band are just kind of like bemused watching this.
Yeah, let's start with Slanted Enchanted, because there's some really fun facts about the casting of Slanted Enchanted. So there's 3 leads. I guess the main lead, his name is Michael Esper. And so he has like a legitimate Broadway career. Like, he was in American Idiot, the original cast of American Idiot. He was also Lazarus in the David Bowie Black Star sort of musical that they worked on right before David Bowie passed. So, like, he's not like just some like random guy who like did musical theater for like a semester in college.
Right. It's serious. Like, they're making real theater. So
Yeah.
just to clarify, like, there are aspects of it that are definitely mocking, but the musical is not one of those things. It is real.
And then Catherine Gallagher, who is one of the other leads, she, I think, was nominated for like a Tony for the Jagged Little Pill musical. I think that's also important to point out that they both come from jukebox musicals.
Right.
The third lead is Zoe Lister-Jones. She's been on a lot of TV stuff. She also writes and directs stuff that I'm not familiar with, but she's probably best known for being on like New Girl and Life in Pieces and the Whitney Cummings sitcom. And she's just a big Pavement fan who I think knew Alex Ross Perry, and when she found out that he was working on this, was like, I want in. But like, these are like real people who are really trying to make this musical work, it seems.
Genuinely. They're genuinely trying to crack this jukebox musical, and they are genuinely very, talented at what they do. So it is not really a joke in that way.
Yeah, so there's a narrative where Michael Esper is a character named Essam, and he's basically caught between 2 worlds. There's Anne, who is Zoe Lister-Jones, and that is a reference to Anne Don't Cry from Terror Twilight. And then you have Catherine Gallagher as Loretta, who is from Loretta Scars from Slanted and Enchanted. which sounds like a terrible idea, but that's kind of what they went with. We don't really know what the plot is outside of that, but they use Pavement songs in jukebox musical form. There's dancing Santas for sure, which I assume is from the Gold Sounds video.
A lot of Santas.
I did find out that the choreographer is not like a big time Broadway choreographer, but like someone who does some choreography, but is also a comedian. So I think not that she's not qualified, but she doesn't have the credentials that the talent has.
For sure. Tim Heidecker also pops up in this film, who I'm sure is also a Pavement fan and wanted in on, this spectacle. But there are a lot of things in it that give it kind of this like Dadaist, feel. Like they're just going for some kind of weird performance art. It's almost like somewhere between a real jukebox musical and like a piece of performance art. And if you were lucky enough to see it, I actually would love to know more about it, because the only complaint that I have about this portion of the film is that you actually don't get to see much of it performed. You get to see clips of it, and that, the style of the edit cuts pretty quickly between archival footage and, footage from these content experiences, and you don't get to see it all.
Right.
There's no cast recording. Ryan and I were saying how we would love to have a cast recording of the Slanted Enchanted musical.
Well, we will get some of it on the soundtrack. If you look at the track listing, there are songs from the jukebox musical, but I don't think it's in a specific order where you get to like really get a feel for the narrative. But it was really captivating to watch the auditions for the musical. So you have a lot of actors and actresses who, I assume do musical theater for a living. And they're trying to sing Pavement the best they can, but not as Joe Keery would as Stephen Malkus, but as a musical theater performer.
Right, in the style of...
Yeah, in the style of Pavement. So you have people singing Gold Sounds, as beautifully as they can. As on key as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, because there's something about musical theater that I think is a nice juxtaposition to Pavement songs, because musical theater is inherently, it's very vulnerable, it's very earnest. If you're in musical theater, that you have to really mean that shit. Whereas I think Pavement gets, branded as this band of irony. And so the juxtaposition of the irony versus this really, people are digging deep, right, to try to like find the right way to perform these songs was kind of great for me. And then also I think just revealing some of the great, like truly hook laden songs that they have is, I mean, they just have some great hooks. Some of them I think are fundamentally really great pop songs. And you can't always hear that, against the production or, the original source material of the way Pavement plays.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Steve Hyden, but I remember some music critic that I really like was like, like Pavement is a pop rock band. Like Stephen Malkmus is a great pop songwriter, but people, talk about them in different ways, they're slackers, but like he had a great ear for melody. Yeah. And that's kind of, as an aside, that's kind of, I think, the difference between his stuff with the Jicks and with Pavement.
Mm-hmm. Yep. His solo stuff really brings that forward, that part of his skill set. I also think it's something that sets them apart from some of their contemporaries, which don't get talked about a lot in the film, but you do have people like Kim Gordon that show up on camera. And to me, I think that's what's always set them apart from a band like Sonic Youth, is that they're not strictly noise. There are things that they were able to capture and do that really nobody else was doing. There was like sound that they could make that nobody else was bringing. And I think that's always been the case and why people tend to love them. It's certainly why I love them, despite, I think, this movie and them, they kind of keep you at arm's length, right? They're not a big, hard on their sleeve type of band, but they're a wonderful band. They're a fascinating band.
Yeah, and I think that's captured throughout the film. That there's this kind of weird distance. One of my other favorite bands of the era, Sebadoh, which was completely hard on the sleeve. Like Malkmus, there's these walls that he has put up, And he's able to kind of connect with you despite that, the fact that you like almost know nothing about him.
Right. And you don't. And it's, it's intentional. And if you go into this film, quite frankly, thinking, I'm going to know more about Stephen Malkmus, you will not. You will know less. When you come out of this, potentially you will know less, or you will be more confused or more in a state of confusion about like what's real about his mythology and what isn't. And that's completely intentional. But you may come away thinking like those are some really dope tracks.
So Steve Hyden wrote a article on his 50 favorite Pavement songs to celebrate Pavements. And for the song Stop Breathin', it perfectly encapsulates the Pavement experience. He said the song is about fathers and tennis. But knowing that it's Malkmus, the only true part of the song is probably about tennis. It's probably not really about his father.
Right. That's such a good point.
And so, because there's these walls of a lack of like biographical information, I think that's kind of where Range Life kind of comes in.
Yes.
And Range Life is, I think, a lot less sincere than the musical. It's definitely everyone kind of in on the joke of what Alex Ross Perry is trying to do. Perfectly encapsulated by one of the last scenes where they show the infamous Lollapalooza incident where they get pelted by mud. And in the Range Life biopic, they have this big fight about, you don't care and you say it doesn't matter. Spiral is yelling at Stephen Malkmus in this very dramatic scene after getting nailed with mud. And then they cut to like what actually happened backstage, and they're just like laughing it off.
Right. Right. So it's kind of the deflation of that, arguably like the biggest piece of like Pavement mythology from the 90s is that Lollapalooza moment. And it's like, no, actually, maybe it wasn't as big a deal as you thought. But at the same time, I think something that the biopic does do is give you a better idea of what it might be like to be in a band with someone like Stephen Malkmus. There is like there's sort of something there where when you see Joe Keery start to inhabit him, even though you can tell it's tongue in cheek and he's only taking it half seriously, he is still getting legitimate leads and advice on how to be him in, his 20s and in the 90s. And he seems frankly like kind of a pain in the ass to be in a band with. Very obtuse, very shy, very much not wanting to be on, MTV's 120 Minutes. Like, not somebody that ever wanted to be a star in that way.
Fucking around on The Tonight Show.
Fucking around The Tonight Show. I read somebody saying that they were, like, analyzing Stephen Malkmus shaking Jay Leno's hand on Tonight Show like it was the Zapruder film.
Oh, yeah. I was like, oh, how's this going to go?
Exactly.
Range Life, I think, it's like entertaining. I'm glad that it's used sparingly. I like how it kind of like pans out at the end and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna stay back, guys, and then he just immediately like starts playing stereo.
Right. There are elements of it that I actually found really funny and entertaining. And even just the, like you said, about the casting moments that they show you for the musical, it's the same thing for the biopic where they kind of show you these little casting moments where they're getting people together that, look like members of the band. This actor, Fred Hetchinger, who you probably recognize from White Lotus season 1, he's the teen boy in that particular season of White Lotus, as Bob Nastanovich, is really funny to me.
And then he's like on a Zoom call with Bob.
Yeah, it's very funny to me because they actually do kind of resemble him pretty strongly, and it's pretty funny. But there's also, there's something happening here where like the actors are doing that like send up of actors thing where they're taking it really seriously. I think like the best example in the film is Joe Keery saying to his vocal coach, like, I think I'm going to need a picture of Stephen Malkmus's tongue. I think we can get that. I think we can get a picture of his tongue. And he comes back later with like this picture of his, whatever.
Right. Oh, he was about to go play tennis, but this, so, we didn't have a lot of time, but he laid it flat.
Totally. And I think again, like I think it's interesting. I think it went on a little bit long for me. It's sort of like a gag that sticks around too long. And I think we've also kind of seen, through things like Pop Star and Walk Hard, we've seen some of these things I think be played out before. So to me, it's kind of the weakest link in the movie. There are other things that feel a little more interesting or a little more I don't know, like they're a little more new. But it's very Pavement also.
I do love the drummer. I think the drummer, I forget which, was it Griffin? Griffin Newman, I think, is the drummer.
Yeah.
And he says, I'm not going to have enough time to learn drums. I've got other things going on. So I'm going to have to just inhabit the soul, figure out how to inhabit the soul of a drummer.
Right. That part was really funny.
It does go a little long, but I think it's meant to go on a little long.
I think so too. I think it's like meant to be that joke that just overstays. And I think you can also tell that it's maybe the part of it that, if I had to speculate, it's the part of it that Malcolmus is probably the most into or the most proud of, because it really does fuck with that sense of like real, not real. And it's a total middle finger to any kind of traditional biopic.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell like how heavy-handed like some of the dramatic moments are. Like, what the fuck is this? It's an LP with only 3 sides.
Totally. Jason Schwartzman is there, like hamming it up as their manager. Like, it's got great elements. And again, maybe for me, if it had swapped between just that and like the archival footage of the band, maybe there's something symmetrically that would have worked better for me personally, but it felt like a lot to have all of that going on too. It's like a clown car of ideas. And you might love that, and you might also find that like really exhausting. It's 2 hours and 8 minutes long. So it's long. They give you a lot.
I think I loved it, but I think I wanted it to be like 20 minutes shorter.
I think I wanted it to be 20 minutes shorter or even like a half an hour shorter. And then I wanted companion pieces. I wanted to see like more of the things that they actually went and made that they don't show you in full, or even really like in an extended.
Well, that brings me to my next question, Nicole. So, I mean, obviously this movie is still getting rolled out to theaters, but I'm sure most Pavement fans are also like, when is this going to come out on some sort of physical media for me, where I can watch it as many times as I want, or in whatever order I want to? What do you think, or what would you like them to put on this Pavement DVD Blu-ray for bonus features?
Ooh, I mean, it's so rich for bonus features, right? I would love like a virtual tour of every weird fake and not fake thing that's in the museum collection. I would love like a full recording of the Slanted Enchanted musical. I think that would be wonderful because it's, I imagine, never going to get performed again. So it'd be great to have that. I think it also would be great, and maybe they exist. Maybe they already exist for streaming. I didn't check, but it'd be great to have the band performances from the Whitney thing as well, because there were some really cool ones. They're really great covers of Pavement songs.
Yeah, I know that when it happened live, I think there were performances that popped up for a while. I don't know if those are still up, but it was a really cool concept. It was basically like a super group of like the girls from like Bully and Speedy Ortiz, Snail Mail, and Soccer Mommy. I would love to see that set on some sort of, as a bonus feature. I would love to see visually what Slanted Enchanted is like. I don't know if they have like a full filmed production of it, but I would love to see that. Obviously, I would love to see more like of the rehearsal footage, like full songs. I would love a Pavement live album of this 2022 tour because I thought they sounded great. But I think part of the reason that Pavements exist kind of in this form is because Lance Bangs made a documentary on them in 2002 called Slow Century. So
Right.
I'm sure Alex Ross Perry had seen that and was like, well, I can't just do an updated version of Slow Century.
Right. Exactly. And I was going to bring that up as well. And I think that's probably the one for people seeking a more traditional entry point for Pavement. If you want to actually, know or learn a little bit more about their historical context or who they are as a band, that would probably be, more of your go-to. And you have to give, I think, Alex Ross Perry, the director, a lot of credit for trying as hard as he could to take a route that nobody has taken before, because look, like the rock documentary is a format that's been around for a really long time. It's been done a lot of different ways. You have your Gimme Shelters and you have Dig and you have things that they're innovative and interesting, but you can't take those paths directly. So I think it is, in a way, the perfect Pavement documentary. If not the perfect, film, it's the perfect Pavement artifact.
Right. And so we are a soundtrack podcast, and Matador is putting out a soundtrack for it. We don't have an advance copy of that. But if you watch the movie and you look at the soundtrack, like 90% of the soundtrack comes from stuff that you see in the movie. So
and a lot of live material as well. Like there's a
Right.
lot of live performances that they're not seen in full. They're kind of seen in like impressions.
Yeah, we were promised one new song on the soundtrack. It's not an original song. It is a cover of Witchy Taito, which they played on the 2022 tour. I kind of don't understand. I kind of don't know the origin of the song. Like, it's been covered a lot, but that's the new song. People speculated that the song called "An Intro to a Motion Picture Soundtrack" was a new song, but I guess Matador clarified to Stereo Gum that it is just 25 seconds of noise.
Which, again, like, totally appropriate.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of deep cuts. There's not a lot of like, oh, here's a live version of Shady Lane.
Right.
Which is probably also because, they did a best of in 2010, so they kind of wanted to avoid like just putting more of those songs on there. I did appreciate there's a lot of deep cuts in Pavements. I think Greenlanders played and like Circa 1762, which is like a BBC session that never came out on any of their albums. So it's got a lot of, obviously you're going to hear your Cut Your Hairs and your Gold Sounds because it's important to the Pavement story. But there's a lot of songs that are interspersed throughout the film that, are really deep cuts, which I think is what a Pavement fan would want.
And speaking of that, something that I wanted to ask you as our resident Pavement scholar / superfan, were there any moments in this film that you either hadn't seen before, like those deep cuts or those live moments that you hadn't seen presented in this way, or like things that you really wanted to go on longer or that you really wanted to see more of?
Anything live from the 2022 rehearsals or tours I wanted to see more of because I love seeing them live on that tour. I was surprised that they had so much of the footage from like the early days, like with Gary Young. I don't know if I had seen all that footage of them like opening for Sonic Youth.
Right, that was super cool.
And because Pavement is a band that ended in the 90s, I don't think I ever went back to like learn exactly like the origin of everything. Like I have an idea, like I know when the albums came out and I know roughly like, okay, like the first Slanted and Enchanted is just them with Gary Young. And then Steve West joined with Crooked Rain, but I don't think I understood like exactly when people joined and like what the lineups were. I think I knew that Steve and Bob knew each other. I didn't know that they knew each other since they were like 13.
Right.
So it was good to get some of that stuff fleshed out. I know there's not like a ton of like stuff about like family, but I think you do see Spiral's daughter, like, oh, he's got a kid. And you learn that.
Right. Yeah, you kind of see these brief sketches of their personal lives, these little like fringe moments where like, okay, well they've got kids to send to college and stuff now.
I think there's a quick cut near the end of the film where it shows them at Primavera and you see Malcolmus like holding his wife's hand and it's like really weird to see.
Feels illegal.
Yeah, it's like I know he's married and has
Right.
kids, but it's just like to kind of like physically like see like, oh yeah, like in some way he's a normal person.
In some way, he's a normal person and not just like the idea or concept of a person.
Right.
For sure. And I think other members of the band, again, this is where I kind of always wonder, like the Malcolmus of it all versus the Pavement of it all. You have to wonder if the other members of the band were as bent on doing this way, or if it would have wound up this way if not for Malcolmus saying, like, no, this needs to be weird as hell. And if it's not weird as hell, I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, probably not. I would assume that the only one that would have had any sort of other opinion would have been Spiral, because he's the only other creative force. I feel like the other guys are just kind of like they're they're just there to hang out and enjoy the ride.
Yeah. And you brought up, we were bringing up clips, and it was so great to see like things from the Fonda because we went to those shows in LA, and so it was nice to see them perform Grounded at the Fonda. Really cool. It was cool to see a lot of those sort of behind the scenes sessions. It was really cool to see a lot of those archival clips because I don't think that they get circulated very often, and some of them are probably really hard to find, like really hard to dig up some of those earlier pieces of footage. One of them was that Beavis and Butthead moment where Beavis and Butthead are like giving them shit for being a terrible band.
Try harder.
Try harder. But it's great because like so much of the Beavis and Butthead material alone like has a bunch of, whatever rights issues attached to it. So you can't watch them bust on bands and songs much these days. So that was kind of fun. I would have loved actually more sustained moments of all of that just because selfishly, like I really get into those things and they're so hard to find about the bands that you love. It would have been great to see maybe a little bit more. No more room for it.
I
But
always love when they refer to the Space Ghost Coast to Coast episode.
right, every time, like any kind of Space Goes Coast to Coast episode, and like I'm in.
But have you seen that episode?
I have. It's been a really long time though.
It is the best episode ever.
But again, like I think maybe as a fan, it makes you want to go back and be like, okay, I'm gonna have to like watch that whole thing.
Right.
I'm gonna have to see that.
Because the whole premise is that Space Ghost is like, oh, I wrote today's episode. And Zorak and Moltar are like, oh, shit. And then he's like, get me the Beatles. And he's like, the Beatles are dead. Get me the Beatles. So they just get him Pavement. So speaking of like these little pop culture things like Beavis and Butthead and Space Ghost, I wanted to bring up some needle drops that I remember of Pavement that are not in the film. And I don't know if you're familiar with any of these, or maybe it'll ring a bell, but I remember hearing Cut Your Hair in a very Brady sequel.
Yes, I don't, but I believe you. It's probably their most commercial sounding song, arguably.
Yeah, and it was like the most on the nose use of it, like
Somebody who's actually getting their haircut, like Marsha's getting her haircut, or what?
the mom.
Oh, in the weird Carol Brady cut.
Yeah, so
Where it
Carol's
goes
getting her
back,
haircut.
but it can't be anything else. What
yeah.
it is that the scene? I do
Yeah.
remember that scene.
So that was like the first like Pavement needle drop outside of like Brain Candy, where I was like, oh, they're using Pavement in a movie, in a Brady Bunch movie, which I guess kind of makes sense because it's like this very meta satire of the Brady Bunch.
Right.
So the second one is from a cartoon called Mission Hill. Do you remember Mission Hill?
I do not remember Mission Hill. That rings 0 bells for me.
So it was one of those like WB like adult cartoons that they were trying to push when they started that network.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it the CW? That's the W became the CW, right? Or something.
Yeah,
like that.
let's just call it the CW. That's how I remember it.
So I think for a while they were trying to like figure out like, oh, let's make a primetime cartoon for adults, kind of like our Family Guy or our Simpsons, our King of the Hill. So they got Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein, who worked on The Simpsons during the the golden era of The Simpsons, and they made this cartoon called Mission Hill, which is about like this cartoonist Andy and I guess his little brother from high school like has to move in with him, and it ended up going to like Adult Swim. Like it lasted a season, went to Adult Swim, and I think that's when I started watching it. I was in college, so like you have endless time to watch things that, oh yeah, I heard about that once, let's just watch
For
it.
sure. Yep.
And so I would watch it with my roommates in college, and they would be like, what is this? And I think my roommate was like, it's amusing, but like the show's not funny. And it was like in this weird gray area. Like cartoons are always supposed to be funny. Like even if it's a Pixar movie, even if it's an anime, like it should be funny at some point. But it's like a show that never made you laugh. And the last episode, I think, of the season, and I don't think they had any idea that they were probably going to get canceled. Is I think the little brother has prom, and his older brother is like forced to chaperone, and like the music being played at the prom that's just kind of playing throughout the prom is like the guitar part from like Major Leagues. Which is like kind of like this melancholy, like very pretty song. But I was like, oh shit, it's Bring On the Major Leagues. It's Pavement. And then probably the most famous use of Pavement was in How I Met Your Mother. And so they don't use the actual Pavement song, but they use two different covers of Spit on a Stranger. And I believe it's to kind of bookend a relationship. So for the Venn diagram of people who are How I Met Your Mother and Pavement fans, if you want to learn some How I Met Your Mother lore. So there's a character introduced in the first couple seasons named Victoria. She is a baker. I think if you watch the show from the beginning, you kind of are sad when Ted breaks up with her. And so I think when he first meets her, you get the Nickel Creek Spit on a Stranger. When they break up, there's a Catherine Williams cover of Spit on a Stranger, which is like way more sad. And so apparently Victoria was supposed to be like the mother character if How I Met Your Mother was going to get canceled after like 2 or 3 seasons.
Interesting. So that was kind of going to be their song in a different universe for the show.
Yeah, so if it was going to get cut short, there's going to be Victoria as the mother, and, so it ended up being Christina Melody. But anyways, so it was interesting to hear those two versions of Spit on a Stranger. I know a lot of people who like Nickel Creek and have no idea that Spit on a Stranger is a cover.
Yeah, I mean, that happens a lot, right? With songs like that. And Pavement's one of those bands where, because I think they are relatively low key, it's easy to skip, a generation, I think, with their music. This is maybe a good segue into what happened with Harness Your Hopes. Harness Your Hopes is a song that apparently by some algorithmic quirk on Spotify gets served to a lot of people that like a lot of different genres of music, and for whatever reason has like hundreds of millions of listens and like kind of viral fame on TikTok, which if you had to pick a Pavement song to get that kind of fame, like Harness Your Hopes, it's great. I love Harness Your Hopes, but it's crazy, right? It's crazy. And they mention it in Pavements, the film, actually. It comes up briefly and you see some like TikTok clips of people using it.
Yeah, so it's a weird story. I think Stereo Gum did like a story on
a deep dive.
Dive on kind of why that happened. Like, why is this Pavement B-side, like, why does it have like hundreds of millions more streams than any other Pavement song? And like it's been like a fan favorite for a long time. There's a BBC session of it from like '99 or something like that the hardcore fans love. And so, we were happy when they re-recorded it for it ended up on the Spit on the Stranger EP. And I remember like in 2010 when they reunited, like someone like behind me like yelled like, play Harness Your Hopes. But it wasn't like, like when we saw them in 2022, like people who were like sitting in the balcony like stood up for Harness Your Hopes.
Yeah, it was like a huge moment.
And so like that is weird to me. Like the fact that like people like it, like that's not a surprise to me.
Right. It's a great song. It's not a surprise. It's that what's a surprise is that it has such a lead over any other Pavement
Yeah, that it
songs.
took a life on its own, like that's weird.
Yes.
And especially because it's like the only song like Gen Z knows.
Right, exactly. And so that's kind of my point is that like if this is the one song that Gen Z knows. It's funny to me. And I have to wonder like do you go to the back catalog and you're like this is great, or do you go to the back catalog and you're like nothing sounds like enough like Harness Your Hopes to me? I don't know.
Like what is this slanted and enchanted bullshit?
Right? Because you would go back to something like Slanted and Enchanted and be like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I met a kid at Legoland.
Why are you
I
mean
was I
Legoland,
was
Ryan?
yeah, at Legoland. I was with my kids and I went to get an icy. And the kid at the concession stand, probably like 16, 17 years old, right? I was wearing my Pavement t-shirt and he goes, "Hey, what's that what's your shirt mean?" I said, "Oh, that's for this 90s band called Pavement." And I thought that would be the end of the conversation.
Right.
And he goes, "Oh, that's what I thought it was. It's that Harness Your Hopes band, right? That's a
Shut
good
up.
song."
No way, at Legoland. The
At Legoland.
concessions guy at Legoland.
Yeah. Shout out to 16-year-old icy guy at the Legolands.
Shout
At
out to
Legoland.
that guy. Like I actually want to know if this guy will watch Pavements, and then I want to know what he thinks of it. I want to know what somebody that's only heard Harness Your Hopes thinks about the movie Pavements.
Oh, so speaking of like this weird, like layered thing about Pavements, Harness Your Hopes just became their first gold single. And like all the gold records that are in the Pavement Museum and Pavements are fake.
Right.
But now they actually have a gold record. And I feel like Alex Ross Perry kind of like manifested that this would eventually happen.
Absolutely. Well, again, there's something kind of weird to this in a way because and I don't think it's just because I'm a fan, but I am somebody that, follows music and music journalism and all of these different events from the Pavement exhibit to the musical were really heavily covered. And I think this happening at the same time as this recent algorithm quirk where everybody is suddenly, making TikToks to harness your hopes, I think has sort of weirdly, it's not just manifesting, these are like marketing events. Like these are things that they promoted, things that got headlines. So in a way, they're very stunty. Like he manufactured these stunts and then they became content in the film in a way that's surprising. I did not know they were going to be part of this film, but I knew about them.
Yeah, I don't think we knew at first that the museum was going to be part of the movie.
Exactly. I did not know that. Maybe other people did, but I was not in on that.
The biopic for sure I knew was going to be part of the movie.
For sure. That for sure. And I had heard about the musical and I was like, that's weird, but sure.
Yeah, I don't know if we knew the musical was going to be part of the movie. But I think people knew that Alex Ross Perry was part of it, so I don't think they knew as much about the museum, like who was behind that.
Yeah, I think a more casual sort of follower of these things and of Pavement, which is probably more where I fall on the spectrum. I thought that it was mainly the Joe Keery biopic and that would be, somehow constructed in a way that felt really disorienting and weird. And that is part of the answer to what Pavements is, but it's a fraction.
Yeah, they cut a trailer just for Range Life.
I mean, yeah.
And you thought it was terrible.
It's terrible, but now I'm like, okay, it's data, it's brilliant. Like it was meant to be terrible. Do you know what I mean? Like, of course it was terrible.
Right. Like I think they show that behind the scenes thing with Mark Eybold where he's with the actors and he's like, we wouldn't have been in a place like this, and like the beer cans are like called Gold Sounds Lager and and things like that. So intentionally supposed to be like bad.
Intentionally bad. And there's, even having watched it, there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and there is like a certain amount of inscrutable stuff in this. Even as somebody that knows a certain amount about Pavement, I found myself Googling. I was like, wait, did that happen? Is that real? because it's just done in such a disorienting way. I don't think they want you to really know the moments where people are being sincere versus the moments where they're mocking something or where they're being insincere. It's very hard to tell where the line is. Like there's a scene, for example, towards the end of the movie where they are backstage with Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, and they were talking about the Barbie movie and Pavement's like, minor part in the Barbie movie and of being part of this like example of like patriarchal music culture, like mentioning pavements and mansplaining pavements. And that moment seems genuine, but also maybe it's not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that part is genuine because I think I've seen Bob on Twitter be like, oh, we're big fans of Greta, or
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of Greta.
and it seemed real to me, but it also seemed like I could just as easily believe that Alex Ross Perry was like, hey, Greta, you want to do this scene? And so you don't really know. And I think that's the part of what the movie makes you question a lot of what you're seeing. You don't really know. You don't come away closer to knowing. And you don't come away closer to knowing really why the band broke up. Maybe you feel differently, I don't know, about some of what's talked about in that film.
I think Bob kind of explains it at the beginning when he's like on the Zoom with the actor, where he's like, Steven is like very talented and the rest of us are just trying very hard. And I think that's like what most Pavement fans kind of understand as like the reason the band broke up. It's just like they couldn't keep up with Malcolmus, and Malcolmus just eventually wanted to be in like a band with musicians that were capable.
Right.
Not to say that they're bad, but I think a recent story came out where, the 2022 tour, like it sound like everyone's so happy with how it sounds, and Malcolmus is like, yeah, because we actually practiced.
Right.
And
Right.
that like when Pavement was an active band, they all lived in like different states. Like Malcolmus was in New York, Spiral was in San Francisco, Bob was in Kentucky. I think Steve West was like in Virginia. So sound check on tour was really the only time they could practice the songs.
Yeah, again, that makes a little more sense. I think because it's also told in such a non-linear way, and you get pieces of people's, impressions, recollections throughout the entire film, but you don't get them all at once. You do kind of sit with yourself trying to, put together certain things. There's a part where they talk about, the exhibit. And in the exhibit, there's this pair of handcuffs that I'm sure is not the actual pair of handcuffs, but it's meant to represent, I guess, this moment in '99. We're in this concert in London, and Malcolmus hangs these handcuffs on the microphone, and that's his, statement about how it feels being in the band. But it's never really like elaborated on, like why he felt trapped, handcuffed to the band. You just kind of have to infer that it's Malcolmus.
Yeah, and I think he even explained in like a later interview, like when he did that, he wasn't like necessarily like trying to tell the band that they were gonna break up. He just kind of felt that way that day and got a pair of handcuffs.
Yeah,
And then
and
realized
you
that
get the sense that like that's how he operates. Like he just kind of felt that way that day, and then things happen.
right. And it was kind of like they were gonna break up, but like that's not how he wanted to tell them they were gonna break up. Kind of one of those sort of things. One thing that I wish they had mentioned, and maybe Alex Ross Perry couldn't get the footage for it, but listener of the show and friend of mine, Dan Vigil, we were nerding out about Pavement on the 2022 tour, and he said, "Hey, did you go to Spiral's birthday party show?" And so in I forget what year it was, but so Spiral Stairs, when he turned 50, he wanted to like throw this birthday party concert in San Francisco. And so the headliner band was supposed to be The Clean. And then he said because The Clean had like visa issues, I think this was probably like a setup, but because The Clean had visa issues, who was going to step in to play Spiral's birthday party but none other than Stephen Malcolmus and the Jigs. So it's Spiral's 50th birthday. Malcolmus is going to be there. You assume they're going to play some Pavement songs, right? So not only did they get on stage to hammer out some Pavement songs for all these probably hardcore Pavement fans in Northern California, but they also reunited with Gary Young for 3 songs. And they'd never really like finished the Gary Young story, and Gary Young has passed away since, so it would have been kind of nice to kind of close that loop. But maybe that would have been too sincere.
And this is the question, right? The question is really, it does feel like there's a definite sidestep away from anything that is vulnerable or that is sincere. And so Gary Young, their original drummer, doesn't get talked about in this film except in a very oblique way. David Berman gets mentioned very briefly, but obviously his life and legacy and connection to the band and American Water and all these things, they don't get discussed at all. So if you go in expecting a deeper look at some of those moments or some of those connections, you're really not getting any of that at all. That's not what you should expect going into Pavements. And I feel like there should be some kind of like whatever FDA warning, right? Like if you are an obsessive about certain types of music documentaries, this is not the one for you. This is not for completists. It's not for people looking for, knowledge. If you're on a quest for things, it's not really giving you that. It's giving you something else.
Right. It's giving you 2 hours of Pavement content.
It is Pavement content, and it's a weird thing to say because I don't consider them a band who, despite this whole harness your hopes thing, right? They're a band that actively courts the content ecosystem that we all live in now. They're very much still this iconic, whatever, towering song of slackerism from the 90s. Like so it's weird. There's a weird tension there, and it's interesting to me that this is essentially like a monolith of crazy content that they made. I think that's why it also feels kind of Nathan Fielder, because there's something that's breaking like the 4th wall, the 5th wall, the 6th wall. It's doing a lot.
Yeah, and like to kind of understand how Malcolmus operates, I think the fact that like Rebecca Cole is playing keyboards from the band, she's from like the Minders, and she has had her own like illustrious career as a musician, but like on the tour, Malcolmus just was like, oh yeah, like Rebecca's my neighbor in Portland. Right. And I think at one of his shows, he's like, she's my neighbor, more than a neighbor, but not in a polyamorous way or something like that. Like, but it's like, oh, like you could be like, oh, this is Rebecca. Like she was in like the Elephant Six. Like she was in the Minder. She's great. Like but people have been like, oh, awesome.
Malcolmus he's never going to give it to you straight. That example of the song about like tennis and fathers is so perfect, right? Because he's never going to give it to you straight. And that's what makes their songs both mystifying, but also so re-listenable to me, is this aspect of you don't really know where you are in that. First of all, they're just very listenable songs and they're great bops, but they're also lyrically like a little bit, you don't know who Stephen Malcolmus is, and you never will. And that keeps you coming back to try to find out.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the point of the whole like Range Life diss. It's like, does he really hate the Smashing Pumpkins? Probably not.
Probably not. You probably just thought it was like a fun thing to put in the context of that track, There's a moment where they flash, and I don't even remember the context of it. Maybe you do. I apologize. But there's a moment where they flash Pavement's #1 song of the 90s, according to Pitchfork in 2010, and it's Gold Sounds. They picked Gold Sounds for that particular era of Pitchfork doing top 10s. For me, if you had to pick one song of Pavements, I think it might be Here. And I think the reason is because it feels like the closest thing to the heart center of what that band is. There's something about that song that feels both I don't know, in the vein of this thing that they do so well, which is like slippery, but then also like pretty sincere. And I would love to see that performed in a musical context in its entirety.
It seems like they I believe they sing it. Well, I don't know. I haven't seen the musical, but it looks like it's something that comes back.
It's like a reprise, yeah. And it kind of makes sense that it would be. And I love that idea, actually. And I love the idea that feels like, maybe the closest you're ever going to get.
That or Frontwards, I think.
Yeah, that's also a really good choice.
Because that has the line that... Frontwards has the lyric that starts the movie of, the stories are never going to add up and they never will. And also, I'm the only one looking for you. And if I get caught, the search is through.
Which, again, like, they're so clever. Malcolmus is so clever, and the things that they do are so singular. There's a reason why people are obsessives about them. There's a reason why we all go on goose hunts trying to find things about them. And there's also a reason why I think this might be considered frustrating by some people. I think depending on where you're coming at in your fandom, you might watch this and be like, well, shit, I'm never going to know.
Yeah. Well, what I think is funny is like when they said that, this is going to have the soundtrack's going to have the first new Pavement song, in 20 something years, like half the people were like, I bet you it's Witchy Taito. And the other half was like, it's probably going to be like a minute and a half of just like instrumental fuckery.
Right.
Like no one was like, ooh, it's going to be a great new song. No. It's going to launch a brand new like everyone knew.
Because you're not I don't think you're a Pavement fan even in a casual way if you assume that they're like giving you something like that, like sincerely. You're like, no, that wouldn't be very on brand.
Yeah, they're not going to try to meet the moment.
No, wouldn't be on brand.
So I think that's the perfect way to wrap up this episode.
I do too.
Thank you for humoring me with this Pavement episode. Pavements episode.
I was like, is this for me or just like the listeners? Yeah, no, of course. This was great. It's always great to get to see something that does not have a wide release yet and that I think will get talked about and I think potentially unpacked for a long time.
Yeah, the most exciting. So when I saw the movie, I couldn't wait to talk to someone about it.
You will want to talk to somebody about this. That I will say that you will want to talk to somebody about this to almost verify your own memory.
Right. You need to have someone else fact check your sanity.
Yes.
Because like even me, who watched a lot of MTV in the 90s and listened to a lot of Pavement in the 90s, I was like, wait, they didn't get a Moon Man from MTV, did they?
I was Googling it. It was like, I don't think that happened. And of course it didn't.
I was like, I watched all those VMAs even though I really didn't need to.
I never know who the Pavement fans are going to be in a room, typically.
Oh, Colbert for sure.
Colbert for sure. Just like in life.
Oh, speaking of Pavement lore, apparently when he took over for Letterman, he wanted Pavement to play the first show.
Really?
And they couldn't make it work.
That's sad. That makes me sad.
And I believe I saw that first episode and it was just John Batiste leading his band into playing Everyday People.
Didn't Colbert play Holland 1945 on his last Colbert Report show?
Yeah.
I'm remembering that right. Colbert has got some good music taste.
Yeah.
He knows what's up.
Well, everyone go watch Pavements. And we're not being paid to say that. We just think you should watch it.
We got paid $0 to be here today.
We got paid $0, but if you want to pay some money to us, you can join our Patreon.
Great segue.
That's at patreon.com/soundtrackyourlife. You can find more information about us on Blue Sky, soundtrackyourlife.net, Twitter and Instagram at SoundtrackCast, and we should have some writing site up by the time this episode comes up, so just follow us on social media and learn about that. Well, thank you again, Nicole.
Always a pleasure to be here, just the two of us. Guestless. Not guest list, guestless.
Yeah, guestless.
I don't know if has this ever happened before.
Find us, Pavement fans, and we'll do another episode with you sometime. We'd love to meet you.